Desperate mother sells her twin to a powerful woman. The shocking truth you won't expect. Before we begin the story, please leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Lydia Montgomery had always believed in the power of hope. She had believed that, despite everything, life would eventually work out. But after the tragic loss of her husband, Simon, and the crushing weight of poverty that followed, hope felt like a distant memory. The house they once shared was now an empty shell, filled with the echoes of what used to be. Lydia had spent years waiting for joy to enter her life. She and Simon had tried desperately to have children, enduring heartbreak after heartbreak, month after month. Finally, when Lydia found out she was pregnant, the joy was indescribable. But that joy came at a terrible cost. Simon was killed in a car accident while rushing to the hospital to meet his sons. The world seemed to crash down on Lydia in that instant, her dreams shattered by the blood-stained asphalt, the very road that took Simon's life. Lydia had always known that motherhood would come with challenges, but this was a nightmare she could never have prepared for. She was now a widow, left to care for 2 newborns without the support of her husband or any family. Simon's family, once loving and kind, had turned their backs on her, blaming her for his death. They said she wasn't good enough. They whispered that she was cursed. They blamed her for the accident, calling it a divine punishment for her inability to carry children for so long. Her eyes were hollow from exhaustion, and her heart was heavy with grief. The isolation weighed on her. She wandered the streets, holding her twins, both of whom were crying from hunger, while she had nothing left to feed them. No money, no family, no roof over their heads. Just endless days and nights of struggle. The world seemed to ignore her, walking by without a second glance, as though she were invisible. One cold night, as Lydia sat on a park bench, her twins bundled tightly in a blanket next to her, she thought back to the days when things were different. The warmth of Simon's embrace, the laughter of shared dreams, and the hope they once had for a bright future. Now that future felt unreachable, slipping through her fingers like sand. Then, just as she began to lose faith, a figure appeared. A woman in heels, dressed in diamonds and power. Lydia noticed her immediately. Tall, confident, with an aura of authority that was impossible to ignore. The woman's eyes were sharp, calculating, as she took in Lydia's worn appearance and the helplessness in her eyes. "Are you the one who lost her husband?" the woman asked, her voice smooth, almost rehearsed. Lydia nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She was too tired to speak. She didn't even know why she was still sitting there. She had tried everything, begged for help, cried herself to sleep every night, but nothing had worked. No one cared. She was nothing more than a broken woman with 2 mouths to feed. The woman smiled, and it was a smile that promised something Lydia couldn't yet understand. "I can help you." Her words were quiet but carried an undeniable force. "Give me one of your children, and you will never have to suffer again." Lydia blinked, confused. What was she saying? Was this a trick? A cruel joke? But there was something in the woman's eyes that made Lydia hesitate. It wasn't kindness. It wasn't charity. It was something far darker. The woman wasn't offering help because she cared. She was offering help because it was a transaction. "I can offer you wealth, safety, and a future for your remaining child." The woman's smile widened, her voice dripping with confidence. "All you have to do is let me take one of them." For a moment, Lydia's mind spun. Her children were her everything. How could she choose between them? The thought of giving one away was unbearable. But what if this woman could really offer her a way out? What if she could give her other child the future he deserved? What choice did she have? Lydia took a deep breath. She was broken, lost, and desperate. Her heart cried out, but her mind was clouded with fear, doubt, and the need to survive. Slowly she nodded. Yes, she whispered. "Take him." As the woman turned to leave, Lydia felt a cold chill run down her spine. What had she just agreed to? Her heart ached with the weight of her decision. She had just made a deal that would change the course of her life and her children's lives forever. She had just sold one of her sons, her flesh and blood, into the hands of a powerful stranger. The truth was, Lydia didn't know who the woman was or what her intentions truly were. All she knew was that she had just made a choice that would haunt her for the rest of her life. And what came next, she could never have imagined. Lydia's heart was heavy with guilt. It had been days since the woman, Isabella, had come into her life, and the weight of the decision Lydia had made hung over her like a dark cloud. The streets were still cold, but Lydia felt even colder inside. The memory of that night, the quiet, calculating offer of Isabella, kept repeating in her mind like a never-ending nightmare. How could she have agreed to give away one of her children? How could she have chosen between them? Lydia had been up all night, pacing in the small room she had found for the twins. She stared at the crib where the two babies lay sleeping, their innocent faces unaware of the terrible decision that was about to change everything. Henry, her sweet, quiet boy, was the one she had chosen to keep. Paul, his twin, was the one she had agreed to part with. And though her heart broke for both, it was Paul she had given away. The truth was unbearable. But there was no turning back now. The next day, the rain was relentless as Lydia gathered what little she had, an old, torn blanket and a small satchel of belongings. She had nothing left but her children, and now she had to give one of them away. Her hands trembled as she walked down the street, trying to make herself believe that this was for the best, that it was the only way to save Henry and give him a future. She looked up and saw Isabella's luxurious car parked at the end of the alleyway, her figure already waiting beside it. Isabella was dressed in a long, dark coat and high heels, her presence commanding, almost intimidating. She greeted Lydia with a cold smile, her eyes scanning her face for any hint of hesitation. Lydia couldn't help but feel a chill run down her spine. "You came," Isabella said, her voice smooth and disarming. She reached out to gently touch the blanket covering the child Lydia was carrying, her fingers soft against the fabric. "I'll take him now." Lydia hesitated for a moment, her grip tightening on the baby in her arms. Her thoughts raced, and for a split second, she wondered if there was another way, some last-minute escape. But the reality of her situation crashed down on her. She had already agreed to this deal. There was no undoing it. With a shaking hand, Lydia reluctantly placed Paul in Isabella's arms. As she looked into the child's face one last time, she felt as if her very soul was being ripped from her. The decision had been made, but the cost would be something Lydia would never fully comprehend. "Thank you," Isabella said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She turned and walked toward the car, holding the child carefully, as though Paul were a delicate object rather than a human being. The sound of the car door closing echoed in Lydia's mind as the vehicle pulled away, taking her son with it. Lydia stood frozen. A piece of her was gone now, and there was no getting it back. She couldn't help but wonder where Isabella was taking Paul, what kind of life he would have with her. Would he be happy? Would he ever know his real mother? Would he remember her? The questions seemed endless, and yet Lydia knew she could never have the answers. Days passed in a haze. Lydia tried to focus on Henry, but her heart ached with every breath. She tried to put on a brave face for him, but she could feel the empty space where Paul used to be. The house felt too quiet, the weight of her loss too heavy, and the people around her, the few who still acknowledged her, didn't seem to understand the depth of her pain. They saw her as a woman who had made a choice, a sacrifice for the betterment of her other child, but they didn't see the toll it had taken on her soul. Lydia wandered the streets, feeling the sting of judgment from everyone she passed. Some gave her sympathetic glances while others looked at her with disdain. The whispers had already started. They called her a bad mother, a woman who sold her child, and Lydia had to fight back tears every time she overheard their cruel remarks. She had never felt more alone. Isabella's visits became more frequent. At first, Lydia thought she might still have some control over the situation. But soon, she realized that Isabella wasn't just interested in the child she had taken. No, she wanted something more. Each time she returned, she spoke of her great plans for Paul, how he would thrive in a world of wealth and influence. Isabella's words were smooth, calculated, and every time she left, Lydia felt more and more powerless. The truth began to sink in. Isabella wasn't helping her. She wasn't saving Lydia's child. She was using Lydia's desperate situation as leverage for her own gain. It was as if Lydia had made a deal with the devil, one that she couldn't undo, no matter how hard she tried. Lydia's rage began to build. At night, she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking of all the things she could have done differently. What if she had refused? What if she had fought harder? But deep down, Lydia knew she hadn't had the strength. The choice had been made, and now she had to live with it. But the more she thought about it, the angrier she became. The more she realized that Isabella wasn't the savior she appeared to be. She was a predator, preying on the weak, manipulating the vulnerable for her own gain. And Lydia knew that she had to stop her. She had to find a way to get Paul back, to expose Isabella for the monster she was. In the days that followed, Lydia made a plan. She would not let her son's life be defined by this woman. She would fight back. With each new day, the fire in her grew stronger. Isabella would pay for what she had done. The days that followed were a blur of silence and regret. Lydia moved through her life like a ghost, haunted by the choice she had made. Every morning, she would wake to the same empty house, the same quiet room where Paul used to sleep. The ache in her chest was constant, a sharp reminder of the decision that had torn her apart. She tried to focus on Henry, her surviving twin. He was a beautiful child, full of life and energy, but every time Lydia looked at him, she couldn't shake the memory of Paul. Paul, who she had given away. The weeks passed slowly, and though she tried to continue on with life, it felt as if she were drowning. She saw the judgment in people's eyes whenever they passed her, whispers following her wherever she went. Some were sympathetic, some were disgusted. They didn't understand. They couldn't possibly understand what it felt like to be at the end of your rope, to be forced to make an impossible decision in a world that didn't care. And then one day, Isabella came back. Lydia had been expecting it. She knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. But when she saw Isabella's sleek black car pull up to her door, something deep inside her stirred. The anger, the resentment, the need for justice. Isabella stepped out of the car, as polished and composed as always, her heels clicking against the pavement with a deliberate rhythm. She was wearing a fur coat, her expression unreadable, as always. She looked like someone who had everything, someone who had won. And Lydia. Lydia felt like nothing more than a broken shell of the woman she used to be. "Lydia, how are you holding up?" Isabella's voice was smooth, almost too sweet, like she was genuinely concerned. But Lydia could see the coldness in her eyes, the look of someone who knew they held all the cards. Lydia felt a surge of anger but suppressed it, forcing a calm that she didn't feel. "I'm surviving." Isabella smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good. I trust your son is well?" Lydia clenched her fists. Henry was fine. He was all she had left. But that wasn't what Isabella was asking. She was still holding Paul, the one she had taken from her, the one she had stolen in exchange for empty promises. Lydia's jaw tightened. "Why are you here?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Isabella stepped closer, her gaze flicking over Lydia before resting on the twin she was holding. "I wanted to check in on you," she said, as if that was all there was to it. "And of course I wanted to ensure that everything is going smoothly on your end. I trust you're still content with our arrangement?" Lydia's pulse quickened. She could feel her blood boiling beneath her skin, but she forced herself to stay calm. No, she would not let Isabella manipulate her any longer. "Content?" Lydia asked, her voice cold. "Is that what you call this? A fair trade?" Isabella tilted her head, the corners of her mouth curling upward just slightly. "Fair trade? Lydia, you should understand by now that nothing in this world is fair. Some of us have to make sacrifices, and some of us have to win." She paused, letting the words sink in. "You did what was necessary to secure a future for your child. What's so wrong with that?" Lydia couldn't believe the audacity. "Necessary?" she repeated, her voice rising. "I gave up my son for your gain, Isabella. I traded his future for what? For a life I'll never have again?" Isabella's face softened, though it looked more like a calculated act than a true display of empathy. She took a step closer to Lydia, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Lydia, you still don't understand, do you? What I offered you was not just wealth. It was freedom, a chance to escape the life you had. You had no other choice. I gave you that choice." Lydia took a deep breath. Her anger was mounting, but she still held herself back. She had to think, had to play her cards right. There was so much more going on beneath the surface than Isabella realized. "So, what happens now?" Lydia asked, her voice sharp. She could feel her pulse racing, the heat of frustration bubbling beneath her skin. "You take Paul, and I go on living this miserable existence, knowing I made the worst decision of my life?" Isabella smiled, that cold, calculating smile that always made Lydia feel like a pawn. "That's where you're wrong, Lydia. You're not the one who lost. I am. You still have your life, your future. I'm offering you the chance to redeem yourself, to start fresh. You can have everything you want, and I'll help you get it, but you must accept the cost." Lydia didn't understand. She couldn't. The cost of what? What more could she give? What more did she have to lose? "You're right," Isabella continued, her voice suddenly more serious, more dangerous. "I took your son, but in return, I've given you the chance to rebuild. To rise above your circumstances. You owe me." Lydia's heart skipped a beat. Owe her. She hadn't just agreed to give away her son in exchange for a life of luxury. She had made a deal with the devil, and Isabella knew it. Isabella reached into her bag and pulled out a thick envelope, handing it to Lydia. "Here, this is the start of your new life. Use it wisely. I'll be watching." Lydia took the envelope, her fingers trembling. She wanted to throw it back in Isabella's face. She wanted to scream, to lash out. But instead, she stood there in silence, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, 1,000 fears. Isabella's smile widened, and with one last, chilling glance, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Lydia stood frozen, the envelope still in her hands, the weight of the world bearing down on her. The weeks following Lydia's decision felt like a never-ending spiral of despair. Though she tried to focus on Henry, her remaining child, it was impossible to ignore the fact that Paul, her other twin, was gone. The void left by his absence was suffocating. She had tried to bury her grief, to focus on keeping Henry healthy and happy, but her thoughts constantly returned to what she had done, to what she had lost. Isabella's visits became more frequent. At first, Lydia thought they were simply routine check-ins, but as time passed, she began to sense something darker beneath the surface. Isabella wasn't just checking on the child she had taken. She was watching Lydia, scrutinizing her every move. It was as if she knew Lydia was on the verge of discovering something. One afternoon, as Lydia sat in the small, dimly lit room that had become her world, she received a letter from Isabella. The elegant, flowing script on the envelope made Lydia's stomach tighten. She hadn't expected this. Inside, a single line of text greeted her. "Meet me at the address below. There is something you need to know." Isabella was making her move. When Lydia arrived at the address, it was a mansion, a house that looked like it belonged in another world. The gates were tall, the stone walls imposing. Lydia had never seen anything so grand in her life, and yet it felt like walking into a lion's den. Isabella was waiting for her at the front door, her usual calm demeanor on display. "Come in," she said simply, her voice low and velvety, almost soothing. But Lydia knew better now. She wasn't here for any kind of solace. She was here to unearth a truth that had been hidden from her for far too long. The inside of the mansion was just as grand, with high ceilings and ornate furnishings, but it felt cold, oppressive, almost like the air itself was too thick to breathe. Isabella led Lydia to a small study in the back, where she gestured for Lydia to sit across from her. Lydia was on edge, but she kept her emotions in check. What did Isabella want to show her? Isabella sat down and stared at Lydia, her eyes sharp. "You're curious, I can see that." Her smile was calculating, almost mocking. "About Paul, about what I've done. About the truth behind all of this." Lydia swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" Isabella leaned forward slightly, her gaze unwavering. "You think you've given up your son for a better life, for a brighter future for Henry? But you're wrong. There's something you don't know about Paul." Lydia's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Isabella smiled, a thin, knowing smile. "Paul isn't just any child. He's special. He's not just the son of a widow with no options. He's more important than you can possibly understand. And he's the reason I've been watching you." Lydia's mind was racing. She felt dizzy. "What are you talking about?" Isabella's eyes glinted with something dark, something Lydia couldn't quite comprehend. "Paul's birth wasn't an accident. He was chosen. His bloodline has connections that go far beyond you, Lydia. His father, your late husband, wasn't just a man of no importance. He was connected to something much bigger, something older. Paul carries the legacy of that bloodline." Lydia felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Her head spun with questions. What was Isabella saying? Was this some kind of twisted game? Had she been lying to Lydia all along? Isabella continued, her voice now cold, detached. "Paul's blood is worth more than gold. He is a key to something that's been hidden for generations. His family, your family, holds the key to unlocking it. You didn't just lose your son. You handed him over to me for a reason you don't even understand." Lydia was reeling. "What do you want from me?" Isabella's smile widened. "I don't need anything from you, Lydia. What's done is done. But you should know that you and your children were never ordinary. And now, because of your decision, everything is set in motion." The weight of Isabella's words hit Lydia like a freight train. Her thoughts were jumbled. Her husband, Simon, had been involved in something she couldn't comprehend. And now, Paul. Paul was a key to something much darker, much more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Lydia's hands shook as she stared at Isabella, who remained calm and composed, her eyes gleaming with a dark satisfaction. For the first time, Lydia realized the full extent of the situation she was in. She hadn't just sold her son. She had been drawn into a world of power, manipulation, and something far more sinister. As Lydia left the mansion, her mind was in turmoil. She didn't know who she could trust anymore. What had Isabella meant by the key? What was this secret legacy that Paul was supposedly tied to? Was she really just a pawn in a game much bigger than herself? The questions burned in her mind, but one thing was clear. Isabella had known exactly what she was doing when she took Paul. It wasn't just about wealth or power. It was about something much darker. And now Lydia knew she had to act. She had made a terrible mistake. But there was still time to make it right. She had to find Paul. She had to protect him and uncover the truth about what he was really part of before it was too late. But as she looked back at the mansion disappearing behind her, Lydia knew one thing for sure. She was in far deeper than she had ever imagined. Lydia's world felt like it was crashing down around her. The revelation about Paul's heritage, the hidden legacy that tied her family to something so dark, so powerful. It was too much to process all at once. She stood at the edge of a precipice, staring down into the abyss of her decisions, wondering if there was any way back from the nightmare she had unwittingly stepped into. As she walked away from Isabella's mansion, the weight of her new reality settled in. She had sold her son to a woman who was part of something much more dangerous than Lydia had ever imagined. Her emotions were a whirlwind: guilt, anger, confusion, and a desperate need for retribution. She had been deceived, manipulated. But now she knew she couldn't just sit back and accept the consequences. She was going to take control of her fate, and she was going to get Paul back. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed answers, and she needed a plan. The first thing she did was find Carter, an old friend from her past, someone she could trust, someone with the resources and knowledge to help her navigate the murky waters of the world she had unwittingly entered. Carter had always been a quiet, resourceful man, and though their paths had diverged over the years, Lydia knew that he was still the one person who might be able to provide the answers she needed. He had connections in the city, and he understood the darker side of life better than anyone she knew. But even Carter had a reputation. He worked in the shadows, out of sight from the law and the public eye. But right now, Lydia wasn't concerned with what was legal. She needed power, and Carter was the key. When Lydia met Carter that night, the dimly lit bar smelled of stale liquor and cigarette smoke. It was the kind of place Lydia hadn't set foot in years. The low murmur of voices in the background and the soft clink of glasses seemed like the perfect backdrop for what she was about to do. She walked up to the counter where Carter sat, nursing a drink. His eyes flicked up when she approached, a faint look of recognition in them, followed by something colder, more calculating. "Lydia." His voice was low, careful. "Long time." She sat down beside him, leaning in close so no one else could hear. "I need your help," she said, her voice steady, but there was an edge to it, a fire burning inside her that wasn't there before. "Isabella St. Clair. I've made a deal with her, and now I need to fix it. I need to get my son back." Carter looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You don't know what you're getting into." His words were quiet but laced with warning. Lydia's eyes narrowed. She wasn't going to let him scare her now, not when everything was on the line. "I don't care. I'm getting my son back, Carter. I've lost too much already." He sighed, his fingers drumming on the glass. "You're right about one thing. Isabella. She's not the kind of woman you just walk away from." He paused, his gaze flicking around the bar before he leaned closer. "But you're not going to take her down by just showing up and asking. If you want to play this game, you have to know the rules." Lydia nodded. "I'm ready." Carter gave her a sharp look. "All right, then." He slid a folder across the table to her. "This is everything I know about Isabella St. Clair." He tapped the folder with his finger. Her past, her connections, the people she's working with. If you want to take her down, this is your start. Lydia opened the folder, scanning the documents quickly. There were photos, names, locations, things that Lydia had no idea existed. She learned that Isabella wasn't just a wealthy woman. She was deeply involved in a world of corruption, secrecy, and influence that reached into the highest circles of society. Isabella had connections with politicians, business magnates, and even criminal organizations. She wasn't just some random rich woman who had taken her child. She was part of a network that spanned continents, And it was clear now that Lydia had made a deal with someone far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. But this was only the beginning. Lydia's resolve hardened as she read through the files. The deeper she delved into Isabella's life, the more she realized how tangled she had become in something far darker than a simple exchange of wealth. This was about power, and Lydia had no intention of being powerless anymore. She had learned that Isabella had one major weakness: her connection to a man named Victor Calloway, a notorious businessman with a dark reputation. Calloway was the kind of man who got what he wanted by any means necessary, and Lydia knew that if she could get to him, she could get to Isabella. But getting close to Calloway wouldn't be easy. He was protected, surrounded by a network of loyal men and women who had no hesitation in dealing with anyone who posed a threat. But Lydia wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't the same woman who had sold her son out of desperation. She was someone new now, someone hungry for justice, for revenge, and willing to take down anyone who stood in her way. The next few days were a blur of planning and preparation. Lydia met with Carter several times, learning everything she could about Victor Calloway and his connections to Isabella. She knew she couldn't do this alone, but with Carter's help, she started to piece together a plan. She would have to be clever, subtle. She would need allies who could help her get close to Calloway. People who owed Carter favors, people who had the skills she lacked. It wasn't just about getting Paul back anymore. Now it was about taking back control, taking back her power. Lydia had made a choice once, a choice that she would regret for the rest of her life. But now, the tables were turning. She was going to make Isabella pay for what she had done. Lydia knew the time had come. Every step, every choice she had made led her here, to this moment, when everything would change. She had studied Isabella's life, learned about her connections, and now she was ready to confront the woman who had stolen her son and manipulated her into making the worst decision of her life. But there was still one thing Lydia needed to do. Victor Calloway. He was the key. If Lydia could take him down, it would send a powerful message to Isabella. It would show her that Lydia was no longer the weak, desperate woman who had handed over her child for the sake of survival. She was stronger now, more determined, and she would stop at nothing to make Isabella pay. The plan was simple, but dangerous. Lydia knew where Calloway would be that night. He was attending an exclusive event at one of the most high-profile venues in the city, a gala that brought together some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the world. It was the perfect opportunity for Lydia to get close to him, to gather the evidence she needed, and to confront him about his connection to Isabella. But as the night drew closer, Lydia couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She had prepared for this moment for weeks, but the closer she got, the more she realized just how much danger she was in. Isabella had power, wealth, and connections that stretched far beyond Lydia's understanding. And Victor Calloway was no less dangerous. Still, Lydia had no choice. This was her only chance. The gala was held in a grand ballroom, the lights shimmering like diamonds above the elegantly dressed guests. Lydia, dressed in a black gown that clung to her like a second skin, stood in the corner of the room, scanning the crowd. She felt both out of place and oddly empowered. The people around her, businessmen, socialites, politicians, had no idea what was about to unfold. She caught sight of Calloway across the room, standing with a group of influential figures. His tall frame was unmistakable, his face sharply defined, and his presence commanded attention. Lydia's pulse quickened as she watched him laugh, the sound too smooth, too rehearsed. He was every bit the powerful man everyone said he was, but Lydia saw through the facade. She knew what he was capable of. She took a deep breath, adjusting the thin, black mask she wore. Tonight, she wasn't just Lydia Montgomery anymore. She was a woman on a mission, a mother looking for justice. Lydia made her way through the crowd, her heart pounding as she got closer to Calloway. Her eyes flicked over the room, noting the security detail. Everywhere she turned, there were watchful eyes. It was clear that Calloway was no stranger to danger, and he wasn't going to make it easy for anyone to get close to him. But Lydia had learned to play the game. She had come this far, and she would see it through to the end. When she reached him, she didn't hesitate. She stepped up to him with the confidence of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Mr. Calloway," Lydia said smoothly, her voice low, almost seductive. "I think we have business to discuss." Calloway turned, a faint flicker of recognition crossing his face, before he masked it with a smile. "Lydia Montgomery, I presume." His voice was smooth, but there was a hint of something calculating in his eyes. "What brings you here?" Lydia didn't flinch. She had prepared for this moment. She had come to expose the truth, to confront him about his involvement with Isabella, and to make sure that everything he had taken from her would be returned tenfold. "I think you know exactly why I'm here," Lydia replied, her gaze steady. "You and Isabella have been pulling the strings for too long. It's time for you to face the consequences." Calloway's smile faltered just for a moment. But then, he leaned in slightly, his tone shifting. "You're a brave woman, Lydia. I'll give you that. But you're in over your head." Lydia didn't back down. "Maybe. But I'm not leaving until I get what I came for." The tension in the air was palpable, and Lydia could see that Calloway was considering his next move. He wasn't used to being challenged, and Lydia could sense that he was weighing the risk of escalating this encounter. He was a man who was used to controlling every situation, and Lydia's defiance didn't sit well with him. But Lydia wasn't afraid. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her. She had already lost too much. Now, it was time to take back what was hers. Before Calloway could speak again, Lydia pulled out the photographs and documents that Carter had helped her gather. The evidence that tied Calloway to Isabella's underground operations, the illegal dealings that spanned across countries, and the proof of their connection to child trafficking. She slapped the folder onto the table between them. "You think you can get away with this?" Lydia demanded, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "I have everything I need to bring you down, Calloway. All I need now is to expose you." Calloway's expression darkened as he glanced at the papers, his composure slipping for a brief moment. But then he leaned back, his hands clasped together in front of him, a smirk playing on his lips. "You're naive, Lydia." He chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "You really think you can take me down with a few documents? You think you can just waltz in here and destroy everything I've built? You don't know who you're dealing with." Lydia's gaze hardened. "I've dealt with you long enough, Calloway. You've underestimated me from the beginning, but not anymore." Before he could respond, Lydia turned and walked away, leaving him standing there with the evidence in front of him. She knew she had made her point, but this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As Lydia made her way toward the exit, she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. She could feel it, the presence of Isabella, of Calloway's enforcers. The time for subtlety was over. Lydia was done being quiet. She had exposed Calloway, and now it was time for the world to see the truth. Isabella's voice called out to her, calm and cold. "You think you've won, Lydia?" Lydia stopped, turning to face Isabella. "I think you've already lost." Isabella smiled, but it was a smile of someone who had nothing left to lose. "We'll see about that, won't we?" The two women stood facing each other, the tension thick in the air. Lydia knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. But now, the tables had turned. She wasn't the prey anymore. She was the one in control. The gala was over, but Lydia's battle had just begun. The night had been a turning point, a confrontation that revealed the darkness of the world she had entered. Yet, despite the small victory over Calloway, Lydia knew that Isabella's power was still looming large, and she was far from done. The stakes had only risen, and now Lydia's resolve was stronger than ever. The documents Lydia had gathered, The evidence against both Isabella and Calloway were a crucial first step, but they were only the beginning. Now she had to make the evidence public, and for that, she needed leverage. Lydia's first move was to get to the press. With Carter's help, Lydia arranged for an anonymous tip to be sent to a prominent investigative journalist, someone she trusted to get the story out without compromising her own safety. The details were carefully laid out. The child trafficking ring, Isabella's underground operations, the illegal dealings of Victor Calloway. This would expose everything. The world needed to know the truth. As she sat in the dimly lit apartment staring at her phone, Lydia felt a surge of anticipation mixed with fear. She was about to change everything. She was about to take back her son, and maybe, just maybe, she would bring down Isabella's empire for good. Lydia pressed send on the encrypted message to the journalist, sealing her fate. She couldn't turn back now. The truth would be out, and nothing would ever be the same. But as she sat back in her chair, there was a nagging feeling at the back of her mind. Was this enough? Had she done enough to ensure the safety of her son, to make sure Isabella would be held accountable? The following days were a blur of waiting. Lydia continued her life, playing the role of a grieving mother, keeping a low profile while the wheels of the plan turned. Her world was filled with uncertainty, each moment filled with a gnawing fear. Would the press take the bait? Would Isabella retaliate? Then, late one night, Lydia received a phone call that shattered her fragile sense of calm. It was Carter. His voice was urgent, and there was something in the way he spoke that immediately set Lydia on edge. "Lydia, listen carefully. The journalist you reached out to, they've gone missing." Her heart stopped. "What do you mean, gone missing?" "I don't know. I tried calling, but no one's answering. I've checked the news and there's nothing." "But something's not right, Lydia. This is bad." The weight of the situation hit Lydia hard. Isabella had always been several steps ahead, but this was something more. Lydia's gut twisted. Had Isabella found out? Had Lydia made a fatal mistake in trying to expose her? Desperation clawed at her. Lydia couldn't let this go. The journalist's disappearance was more than just a setback. It was a warning. Isabella was making her move, and Lydia was now in a race against time. She had to act before Isabella could silence everyone involved. Lydia reached out to another source, a hacker who owed Carter a favor. She needed to know what was happening behind the scenes, who had been silenced, and how. This was no longer about just exposing Isabella. It was about survival. Within hours, Lydia received a message. It was from the hacker. "Isabella's operation is bigger than you think. She's tied to more people than just Calloway. She's embedded in every facet of the city. You're not just fighting one woman, you're fighting a system." Lydia stared at the message, her mind reeling. How deep did this go? How far would she have to go to make sure her son was safe? But she didn't have time for fear anymore. She had to act. The next day, Lydia met with Carter in a secluded location. She was a woman with nothing left to lose, and as she walked toward him, she knew the final battle was upon them. "I've made arrangements," Carter said, handing her an envelope. "You've got to be careful, Lydia. The game's about to change." Lydia opened the envelope to reveal a set of new documents, hard evidence of Isabella's true network, including high-ranking individuals in the police department, government, and even international connections. "This is it," Lydia said, her voice barely a whisper. She knew this would be the proof she needed to take Isabella down. It wasn't just about one woman anymore. It was about exposing an entire criminal network. But Lydia also knew that this would be the final confrontation. She couldn't trust the authorities, not after what had happened to the journalist. The only way to ensure Isabella's downfall was to take matters into her own hands. Lydia's next move was bold. She was going to confront Isabella directly. She couldn't wait for the press anymore. The time for waiting was over. She needed to bring Isabella to her knees to make her pay for the years of manipulation and pain. But this time, Lydia would be armed with the truth. She would no longer be the victim. She would become the one who controlled the narrative. She arranged a meeting with Isabella, telling her it was time to settle everything once and for all. The location was set, an old, abandoned building on the outskirts of town. It was a place where no one would overhear their conversation, a place where things could finally be finished. Lydia arrived early, waiting in the shadows. She could feel her pulse racing, but this time it wasn't out of fear. This was about closure. She was finally going to face the woman who had taken her son, and she was going to take back everything that was stolen from her. When Isabella arrived, she stepped out of a sleek black car, her heels clicking against the concrete floor, a look of confidence on her face. She didn't know what was coming, but Lydia did. "I've had enough of this game, Isabella." Lydia's voice rang out, cutting through the stillness of the empty building. Isabella froze, her expression darkening. "Lydia, you really think you can control this?" Lydia's eyes narrowed. "I've already won, Isabella." As Lydia stepped forward, holding the evidence in her hands, Isabella's smile faded. She knew the truth would eventually come to light. The clock was ticking. The final showdown was about to unfold. This was the moment that would define Lydia's journey. The woman who had once been manipulated by the forces of power was now standing at the crossroads of her destiny. The truth would be exposed, and Isabella would no longer control the game. But Lydia knew this battle would not be easy. The stakes had never been higher. The consequences would be dire, but Lydia was ready, no matter what it cost. Lydia stood in the dim light, her heart racing. The final confrontation was over, but the battle for her son, for her life, wasn't yet won. She had exposed the truth, but Isabella's empire was vast, and the consequences of her actions would echo far beyond this moment. Was it worth it? Lydia thought, as she stared at Isabella's downfall. The weight of the truth was both a relief and a burden. Had she done enough? Had she really taken back control? Or was this just the beginning of a far more dangerous journey? Her mind raced with the implications of what had just happened. Was this the end of the story, or had she merely become another player in a game she hadn't fully understood? Lydia had won, but was she truly free? The questions lingered in the air, unanswered. What would you have done if you were in Lydia's shoes? Could you make the same choice, knowing what would come next? Would you fight back, no matter the cost? Or would you let the power of those who control the game dictate your fate? Let me know in the comments below. How far would you go to protect your child and seek justice? If this story moved you, please give it a rating from 1 to 10. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Did Lydia's journey inspire you? Do you think she made the right choice? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it and subscribe to our channel for more shocking stories. Hit that notification bell so you never miss out on the next tale. We've got plenty more twists and turns coming your way. Stay tuned. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.